Well, hello everybody, it's Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your critique of the week. It's Friday the 13th of February. A scary day, but glad you're here with us, keeping safe. Maybe it's a lucky day, who knows? Let's see, who do we have here watching along right now? Let's see, Brian O'Sullivan's here. Hey Brian, hot off a nice Poetry Space appearance. New Poetry Space is out, that's Katie Dozier's show, podcast only, with me and the squad, talking about self-portrait poems this week with Dante DeStefano, really wonderful poet who was on a few weeks ago talking about titles. Really interesting look into self-portrait as a tool, a little lens to approach your poetry with. Check that out anywhere you get your podcast. Just find the Poetry Space. Anyway, Steve Horrell is here. Leslie Ann Skechterson. Terry Miller is here. Hey, Terry. Winston Munn. Kevin West is here. Nancy Tennell. Dee Coleman. Christina Nueven, Rose Lennard is here, Chelsea McClellan, Sydney Guntherman, Susan Spear, great to see you, Susan. Let's see, Heather Hay is here, Michelle Kimball, Mark Grinier, Cat Original, very cool to see you, Lori Flanagan, Sean Evaningo Sanders, Clayton Clark we got here, Ryan McCarty, Colin Sandberg, met a bit for Colin, good to see you, Colin. Sarah Kahn is here. All right, well, it's a great group on hand to talk about poems. As always, we're going to look at the poems in the queue. Does anybody, the first question, does anybody who's here have a poem open in the queue you would like to look at? Now, if you'd like to submit poems for Critique of the Week, what we do is you submit them through Submittable. Go to rattle.com. You'll find under Content, Critique of the Week as a category. Submit up to 2 poems there, preferably 2. And then we'll go over them at some point. If you have poems in the queue, let me know here, and we'll get to you first. And we'll try to get to poets who are actually here. That's our new policy. So Winston Munn's got some. Let's see. Who else has any? Yeah. And if we got plenty here, though, if we don't have anybody who's in the house. But let's take a look at what Winston Munn has. And as always, leave as much feedback as you can. Every reaction. That's what we want, is sort of a collective understanding of how we're approaching and reading these poems and what we get out of them, what's working, what's not, where we get sidetracked, the things that distract us, the things that enliven us. It's really hard to get a sense of the audience. That's what a workshop does, is allow you to have that reaction of a reader that you don't get. Somebody picks up your book, you have no idea what they think or feel. But in a workshop setting, that classic workshop, sitting around a table, you get to hear what everybody thinks, and you learn a lot that way. That's why we do it every Friday afternoon. Let's see. Affalaby David 27 says he has some from last month. So if YouTube uses a handle, also Cat Original has 2 submitted. Let me know what your name is so that I can pull it up, because it's in Submittable, it's your actual name. On YouTube for the last 2 months or so, it's been handles, which often include people's names, but not always. So let me know who you are, and then we'll pull you up. And hopefully we can get to all 3 poets who mentioned having poems right now. But let's look at Winston's first. And this is Winston Munn, submitted just last week. Winston Munn, a veteran of critique, always helpful. Always giving a lot of feedback, and he's got 2 poems for us. And just wondering, is the backstory needed, or can it be suggested by the circumstances? That's the general question Winston left on these poems. Let's take a look. The first one is In the Dark Room. And here we go with this. In the Dark Room, 1975. I worked in a dark room once in Kodak. We'll see if this brings back memories for me personally. Here we go. This is In the Dark Room, 1975. The soft red light illuminates an enlarger, and the 3 11 by 14 white plastic trays, one filled with developer, another water, and the third holds fixer, a mixture that releases a urine-like odor that fills the dark room with stink. Etched lines in an old man's face rise like an apparition in the developer, a ghost smaller than the man I remember. When the camera captured his essence, sits on a worn-out bed where a single bare bulb dangles from the ceiling like an invitation from a rope. His threadbare suit develops next, a hopeless attempt to dress as resilient. It sounded like he said Southern Pacific, but he might have said some pathetic jobs. The stroke had left his left fist clenched. It clenched tighter, and moisture filled his eyes. When I asked him about family, wasn't any, I heard him say clear enough. In the near dark, half-light red room, where residue of a camera's click is evolving into something solid, I dry his memory, suitable for framing, Time's orphan in black and white. Yeah. Oh, great. So we have, let's see. So we have really wonderful images in this poem, and I think they develop, no pun intended, well throughout the poem. I think, yeah. Let's see. Tierman says, good poem, drops the first the. Left, problematic sonically. Yeah. Jamie Thomas has great images. Yeah, I think my impression is there's an intrigue to it. And there's really great images. It feels a little long, like it sort of lingers on things more than it should. I really want, in this poem, I wanted more a sense of like watching the man sort of unfold, and sort of gradually, like it does when you're developing film. And I think there was a little bit that I'd cut to get it more concise. Let's see. So A of Labby, David says, brilliant ending. Time's orphan is just an interesting phrase. Yeah. Sydney Gutherman says, I like the idea of drying a memory. Yeah, I like that too. And the title sets the scene. Yeah. So In the Dark Room, 1975, that sets the scene really well. It's a good title. The soft red light illuminates an enlarger and the 3 11 by 14 plastic trays at once. So one of the things, I might cut the size and just say large. It's not a detail that's so what I would look for, because the poem feels like it could be more condensed as far as the great images go, but they're sort of, they linger a little too long, I'd say. You can find things that you don't really need, that is sort of excess information. And we can sort of kind of imagine the size of the plastic trays anyway. Yeah, exactly. So Sean says, I don't think you need the 11 by 14. And it's also, when you put out numbers like that, it ends up being this weird mouthful. It takes up so little space on the poem, but it does take a lot of syllabic space. 11 by 14 inch or whatever it is, and you have to wonder how to say it too. And I think the poem is just better. And larger in 3 white plastic trays, one filled with developer, another water. Because we'll see about the right size anyway. Yeah. Let's see. Jamie Thomas says, do we need the year in the title? It would be a smoother launch into the first line without it. And I don't think the year is doing much. I don't know. I think that the year sort of sets it for me. But I was going to suggest maybe, sometimes you see poems situated by place and date as like an epigraph. And you could, say where you were in the year, and then you don't have to really read it. It doesn't become part of the sound like the title does in a poem. Yeah. So I think you could drop that down to the next line and just have that be like a little epigraph. Reynolds starts to keep clear. There is something to the year. I wouldn't want to get rid of it because it makes it feel like even this memory. There's this way that there's like layers of nostalgia going on here, and so the memory of the memory it makes it interesting too, and knowing it goes back that far, and sort of situating in time like that works. Anyway, filled with developer, another water, and the third holds fixer, a mixture that releases a urine-like odor, that fills the dark room with stink. And that's one of the lines I think I would probably cut, because we already know we're in a dark room. We already know it's releasing an urine-like odor. That's just a repetition of it. So I would cut that line. And you don't really lose anything. That releases a urine-like odor, etched lines, and an old man's face rises like an apparition in the developer, a ghost smaller than that man I remember when the camera captured his essence. I think that there's something about the verb's tense here. That you get a little bit lost in what is happening right then and what like what's happening now, like what's a memory of the memory that's within the memory that you're writing about. And so I think, so if you're careful with verb tense here, I think this could be sitting instead of sits, and then that would make the scene a little bit more clear of what we're watching develop. So it'd be like this. etched lines in an old man's face rise like an apparition in the developer, a ghost smaller than the man I remember when the camera captured his essence, sitting on a warm, worn-out bed where a single bare bulb dangles from the ceiling. So then you get, you see that leap in time through the tense that makes it better. Yeah, and Winston says, too, that is a typo that should be than. Smaller than the man I remember when the camera captured his essence. I'm not sure. Another line I would probably cut is when the camera captured his essence, because we know that, too. Like, that's really not adding much. In the same way, there was already the urine-like odor, so we don't need the dark room filled with stink. We also don't need the camera capturing his essence because we know that's what we're watching happen. And that whole thing makes the poem feel more condensed and tight by dropping those unnecessary sort of redundancies, where a single bare bulb dangles from the ceiling like an invitation from a rope. This is one thing I wondered about, because dangling from the ceiling like an invitation sort of implies that. Yeah. Sorry. It implies sort of darkness of the rope as a possibility without having to say it. And I wonder if there's a cleaner, crisper way of just dropping this rope and just letting that invitation sort of dangle, no pun intended. So we make that leap ourselves. His threadbare suit develops next, a hopeless attempt to dress as resilient. It sounded like he said Southern Pacific, but he might have said some pathetic jobs. The stroke had left his left fist clenched. Sorry. So here I feel a little bit lost. It sounded like he said, like, I want to know more about the man in the scene. And there's a way that that it builds a mystery, not knowing what's going on in the photo, like just having the details, but be a little obscure what he's talking about with the Southern Pacific. But I think I feel it leaves me a little bit too far. I would like a little bit more revealed about the setup. The stroke had left his left fist clenched. It clenched tighter and moisture filled his eyes when I asked him about family. Wasn't any, I heard him say, clear enough. I like that. I think that's one of my favorite lines in the poem. It's so simple, but wasn't any, I heard him say, clear enough. This says so much in such a simple way. In the near dark half-light red room, where residue of a camera's click is evolving into something solid, I dry his memory, suitable for framing. Time's orphan in black and white. Yeah, Chelsea McClellan says too, and that line up here, the stroke had left his left fist clenched, is a bit of a tongue twister. It was hard to say for me every time, and I would smooth it out too. I agree with Chelsea. The so the other thing for this ending, it feels I don't know, a little bit different from the voice of the poem. I like the concept of it, but I wonder if that's a better title than it is an ending. Yeah, as Desi Cochrane says, I'd rather not end on something so abstract when you have an opportunity for something concrete. Yeah. Kitty Yager's talking about Julie Eater poems. I don't know where you mean. If you submitted them on Submittable, they should still be there. Southern Pacific could be something pathetic, says Faya Zrala. Lisa Seidenberg says it's the poet, the man in the photo, could be a direction to go. Yeah, I feel what I feel generally is I love the descriptions of the photo emerging. I like the concept of this, but it feels a little clunky to have it be the ending. I would say make this the title. Keep the details, strip it down a little bit like I did of redundancy, but let us in on this story a little bit more. Let us know who this was. 'Cause how I picture it is that this was a subject that you were photographing, maybe for school. I don't know if it's maybe a bias or something, but I'm imagining, most people didn't have dark rooms at home, so I'm imagining it's like a school photo project and went out and did a photo shoot of someone. And this is some details. I would love, I love the sort of the emotional energy and heart in this line, but I don't get enough of the story to be able to do anything with it or expand on that anymore. So it's a really nice line. I feel connected and I want to know more about the subject. So anyway, let's see. Yeah. Sorry, Charlotte just got home and she is not happy. But okay. Well, I think that's it. So that's my advice for this poem. Let's take a look at the other one. I'm sorry for the distractions. The next one is Up on the Roof. Oh, and I just, to look back, the comment that Winston said is a backstory needed or can it be suggested by the circumstances? I think it needs more suggesting. I just want to know more about that. So I guess the answer is yeah, more backstory is needed for this first poem. Colin Stenberg says some family ambiance. Yeah. Sean Evaningo Center says, is it Southern Pacific or South Pacific? Well, I was thinking about this. So my interpretation, just so you know, Winston, was, like I said, this is I imagine it being a school, and that's totally just my projection because there's like room to not really understand the circumstances. But I was imagining it like at a high school, and this was a photo shoot of a man who worked on the Southern Pacific Railroad. He was a subject. At first I thought maybe it was, the speaker's grandfather or something, but then he didn't have any family. So it's somebody different, a subject that's not related to the speaker. And I think that's very touching, but I would like to hear more. Yeah. Winston Munson, Southern Pacific the Railroad. Yeah, that's how I imagine it. A railroad worker, So anyway, that was my interpretation of the poem. Let's take a look at the next one and see what else we can pull out of this. And here's a good comment, I think, by Christina Nueven first, though. More backstory, but could it be shared through the framing of the photo developing? That was my favorite part of the poem, the inherent tension and the slow uncovering of the story as the photo develops. Yeah. Yeah, I think, another thing I should say, too, there's a really great way, we talk about it when we talk about David Kirby's braids of moving back and forth. And he does it with 3 to make it a braid. It's a sort of a form or a stance of poetry. And what you could do really well here is really focus on, I think, more. You did a little bit, but it's a real great avenue into this poem to talk about the story of this person, the figure that's sitting for the photo, as different elements are revealed in the image itself. So you can say, we say he emerges, but one detail at a time could emerge, and each one could give us a little bit more of an understanding of who the person is. And I think that's the thing to develop in the poem. If we push it's like a good frame or a good ladder maybe to climb up and add more about the subject of the poem, of the photo. So going back and forth, so go back into. I see his cane. I remember him doing this. I see his hands, and it reminded me of this. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. And then going back and forth between the memory of the photos and the man's memory and the actual physical in front of us developing photo, and go back and forth frequently. Yeah. Okay, let's take a look at the other one now. This is Up on the Roof, song by the Drifters. I'm not familiar with the Drifters, but here we go. Up on the roof. I'm not from Brooklyn or Philly. The only roof I've been on is the chicken coop in Grandma's backyard when I was 9. But I know the song and I live it when this old world is getting me down, pinning me down like the mad marauder almost pinned Danny Hodges the night Uncle Ray took his 2 boys, me and my brother, to Channel 4 to watch Saturday Night Wrestling live and in person from Oklahoma City. The marauder cheated, had his foot on the rope, which wasn't really a rope, but foam rubber wrapped up in black stuff of some kind and loose slats beneath the wrestling mat. Make the falls sound worse than they are, like real damage is being done. And chicken blood flies after Grandpa wrings a chicken's neck when I'm 11. The headless bird keeps flying for a few feet until reality tells it it's dead, and the dead don't fly or climb onto roofs or listen to the drifters. And I'm not that kid anymore. I wish I were in Brooklyn or Philly, anywhere but this hospital bed, unable to speak, this machine breathing for me. Yeah. So that is Up on the Roof. And again, great details in this poem. Rose Leonard asks a question for clarification. Is it considered fair use to use a song title like this? Fair use is sort of complicated. And I'm not no professional legal advice around here. I'm not a lawyer, but it is way broader than we imagine it to be. It's the general gist. I did sit in part of a committee thing with the Poetry Foundation. There's a guide, a best practices guide for fair use in poetry that the Poetry Foundation put together with a bunch of lawyers, so poets could have these sort of questions answered a little more. And the general gist is that we worry about it way more than we should. And it's a litigious society, and it's possibly sued for anything, pretty much. But really, fair use is pretty broad, and as long as it's following the 4 factors of fair use, which is that it's not taking the whole content, it's adding something. There's an additive value. It's not taking away the value of the other person's content. So the song by the Drifters is not worth any less because there's a poem written after it. You could even argue that it's adding to people's wanting to listen to the poem. So anyway, there's a lot of things. You can use a lot of song lyrics. You can use song lyrics and titles. You can do stuff like that. A lot of it's fair use. As long as it's, for scholarly stuff, it's for artistic stuff. It's adding and expanding on what the original is doing. And anyway. And there also has to be some kind of ability to receive damages too. Like you have to make money off it, which is really what kills poetry as far as a fair use problem. But I know Rose is in that's the Copyright Act of 1976 in the United States. That's really the governing law. It's been some addendums too. But that's in the U.S. There are international standards too, which are sort of on similar frameworks. But I know Rose is in the U.K. Things might be a little different there too. But anyway, so back to the poem. Great details in this poem. More questions. Do you need to credit the song writer rather than the group? No, I mean, you don't have to do that. Referencing it, letting us know what it is, and expanding on it and thinking about it. That's all you have to do. This is a artistic thing that's not taking the intellectual property of someone else and using it. It's using it to make new intellectual property, and that's really what it comes down to. Anyway, let's go back to the poem, though. Leslie Ann Skechterson says, love the images and story, but feel dropped at the end. Yeah, I really, really following along and really enjoying it. And I feel like I sort of it left me leaving more. So I wanted to read it again and think about why that exactly is. So let's go through again a little more slowly. Up on the Roof. And I wonder how much the fact that I don't know the Drifters or know this song is affecting my reading of the poem, but that's something in the real world. But I love all the professional wrestling stuff. I thought the details there were great. Clayton Clark says, great story in this poem. Again, great images, a little lost at the end for me, maybe a Hyben. And that's a good point. I mean, it felt like it was missing that point at the end, like the reason why. What are we learning from this? But I want to read it again before I sort of say anything about that, because I might have just sort of missed it. Up on the Roof. I'm not from Brooklyn or Philly. The only roof I've been on is the chicken coop in Grandma's backyard when I was 9. So a really nice opening there. It establishes the voice. It gives us some sense of situation. But I know I like the song, and I live it when this old world is getting me down. Pinning me down like the mad marauder almost pinned Danny Hodges the night Uncle Ray took his 2 boys, me and my brother, to Channel 4 to watch Saturday Night Wrestling. It's a really great springboard into memory. A lot of detail. And I'm really engaged with the poem right now. The marauder cheated, right? Yeah. Oh, live and in person from Oklahoma City. The marauder cheated, had his foot on the rope, which isn't really a rope, but foam rubber wrapped up in black stuff of some kind. and loose slats beneath the wrestling mat make the falls sound worse than they are. There's really nice details there. Like real damage is being done, and chicken blood flies after Grandpa wrings a chicken's neck when I'm 11. So there's a lot of movement within this one sentence that makes it a little bit hard to follow. So, I mean, not really hard to follow, but it sort of feels like loopy a little bit, or, it drifts between its topic, I guess. So the marauder cheated, had his foot on the rope, which isn't really a rope, but foam rubber wrapped up in black stuff of some kind. And you think at first, and loose slats is referring to the rope still, but then it ends up having a totally different topic. And so I would do a period and just make this a whole new sentence, because there's something a little confusing about switching the topic there mid-sentence like that. Even if it were, it really doesn't. It's actually a comma splice, because technically it should be a semicolon, because it's two full sentences that aren't, that connect, but don't have to be connected. Loose slats beneath the wrestling mat make the falls sound worse than they are is a full sentence. Like real damage is being done. And then the same thing happens within chicken blood flies. But this time it's a leap in like time and space too. So the whole thing is a little bit hard to follow. And I think dividing that up just with the sentences would help with that. Laurie Flanagan says it needs of some kind. And Rose Leonard said the same thing at the same time. Yeah, you definitely don't need that either. It's superfluous. Like real damage is being done, and chicken blood flies after Grandpa wrings a chicken's neck when I'm 11. The headless bird keeps flying for a few feet until reality tells it it's dead, and the dead don't fly or climb onto roofs or listen to the drifters. And this is, I guess, we have a big leap here too. I mean, it's a poem that's moving really fast, and you need. And it feels like it's like running away from us, I guess, is the real feeling. The dead don't fly. So the headless bird keeps flying. So I'm trying to wrap these things around my head. There's the wrestling match. There's the up on the roof. And there's the chicken with its head being torn off. And there's listening to the drifters. And they're all swirling around in the poem of sort of memory that each brings up. And I'm not the kid anymore. I'm not that kid anymore. I wish I were in Brooklyn or Philly, anywhere but this hospital bed. So suddenly we're in a hospital bed, unable to speak, this machine breathing for me. So at the end, does he fall from the roof? We're up on the roof. It just happens so fast. I guess that's how a fall happens, but we don't really get to experience it because I think we're left a little lost. But I think that's what happened. But this is a poem I think needs just more storytelling and stretching out. Yeah. Michelle Kimmel says, great images with detail, but trying to connect the ages mentioned and how it all ties together. Yeah. I think, is that Rachel Grieve with the RR vid notes? I think she says, I was with it with all the leaps right up to the end. Yeah. And Heather Hay says, for me, the swirly, confused parts are strongest given the current situation and presumably confused mental state. If that's the case, I think what we've done, to me, is sort of put this we've sort of backloaded the story. We buried the lead where he's fallen off and, starting out, I'm not from Philly, the only roof I've been on. I think maybe if he just started out up on the roof, it would feel like it made more sense. Instead of starting out by saying I'm not from Brooklyn or Philly and I haven't seen any roofs, but I know the song, we're moving through that, but we don't get a sense that he's on the roof in any kind of situation, So I think if we sort of situated him on the roof at first and then it ended that way, I think it would work. A lot better. Although, as Cindy Guntherman says, I can't see how the chicken fits in, but I like the poem. Yeah. Jaden Middleton says, I think the poem is about looking back over memories as if from a rooftop. So that's a different sort of interpretation than I have. And the fact that we have very different interpretations of the poem, we like the rhythm of it, we like the music of it, and we especially like the images of it, but we're still feeling a little bit disconnected from both of these two poems. I think we need more of the backstory, which is the question you had. And the answer is just yes. I think we want to hear more to not feel lost and to not have such divergent interpretations of what we're reading. Yeah. Okay. So thanks. That was Winston Munn, 2 poems by Winston. Thanks, Winston, for being here as always. And always, really great, especially just the scene that you build are always really great. So keep on with that. Yeah. So a lot of people don't think he fell off the roof. Chelsea McClellan says, even if I know the hospital stays because of the fall, I'm not sure if I understand what exactly is being said. Explored about death or near death here. And Deb T says, I don't think he fell off a roof either. Yeah. So anyway, that's where we are. We're a little bit, we like sort of the journey, but we don't know where we've gone, I guess is a concise way to say it. Okay. Let's take a look at someone else's poems. And it was, remind me. Let me scroll up and see who we're going to look at next. Where did that go? So there's lots of comments when you scroll up. Oh, so you didn't. Okay. Let me mark this as read and then in discussed. And then it's Afalabi David. Okay, great. So Afalabi David from Nigeria. Great to be here. It's a little late at night there, so I'm glad he could stick around for it. He says, just started writing poetry consistently 2 months ago. I submitted Distilled to the Ekphrastic Challenge for December. First ekphrastic piece I've written. I was wondering whether it was too ambiguous without the picture, and if the ending was too abstract. The other poem is more of my strong foot. Also wondering what you think of surrealism. Okay, well, I love surrealism personally. I like journeys and surprising things happening. So this poem, Distilled, we'll see if it stands on its own, first of all, and any just general advice we have for it, okay? Here we go. Distilled. 2 women stand, skirts swimming at the door of autumn. I like that phrase, a door of autumn. Where tree leaves shake hands with grass descending from a single parent's hand, painted with rust and flame. This small world has forgotten. The sky has been squeezed. See the women's skirts. They are sails wanting to whisk us away into the frame in which they were distilled. A snap of the fingers frozen and played with that makes us miss the sun buried in the curving hills. Monochrome rewinds the clock. The door opens. Well, that's interesting. I'm not sure if it's meant to be Haibun with verse, a verse bun, but it feels a little bit like that with this 3-line ending. My main suggestion, I think it's interesting as a standalone poem, but I would change the title if you're not going to have the artwork with it, because I remember the art and it emerges from there, but Distilled doesn't take us to the picture. And I think, if you wanted to title it, after the photograph, it was last month. Hang on. Let me see as I search around. I'm going to pull up the actual photo somewhere here. So this is the photo for those who don't remember it. And the photo was Deserted by Dia Rifa. And I would maybe, you could put an epigraph underneath the title, so you could say the poem is, where do you go? The poem is distilled after a photograph by Dia Rifa, and that would sort of situate us to let us know, because unless you say that it's after a photograph, I think we get a little bit more lost than we would. But anyway, 2 women stand, skirts swimming at the door of autumn. And I love that phrase, the door of autumn, where tree leaves shake with hands with grass, descending from a single parent's hand, painted with rust and flame. So I like the 2 women standing, and I like the opening. I get a little bit confused with the descending from a single parent's hand painted with rust and flame. It sounds nice, but I don't know how to attach this image to this image. And so it has me feeling a little bit lost. The world has forgotten, this small world has forgotten, the sky has been squeezed. And I'm not sure what that means either. So I get a little bit, even though there's nice sounds to it, I don't know what to take from this section here. So I don't take anything. I just sort of read it and I forget about it, which is not what you want to do. You want to have every line of the poem should add something to the picture or the story, or the topic or the emotion that we're being shown and shared. And I feel like this is too distant from the rest of the image that's already been established for me to feel like it's added anything. And if you just read, 2 women stand, skirts swimming at the door of autumn. See the women's skirts, they are sails. I mean, we would need to say see it again, but 2 women stand, skirts swimming at the door of autumn. They are sails wanting to whisk us away into the frame in which they were distilled. The beautiful music to that, and what's really lost by skipping these sections, I don't even know. So I think that's the kind of thing to watch out for and not include. Again, things that are redundant or don't add to the story. Wanting to whisk us away into the frame in which they were distilled. I like that turn of phrase too. A snap of the fingers, frozen and played with, makes us miss the sun buried in the curving hills. And then we have this monochrome, rewinds the clock. The door opens. And I don't know. Again, I don't know if that's intended to be a Haibun with that, but there is a nice leap to it, and there's a fractured off from the full poem feel about it. Let's see what everybody else is saying. It's one of those poems where I read it, some lines stand out, but I don't really know what I've taken from it. I don't know what... Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, again, Michelle Kimball says, I love the opening stanza. It does feel like it needs more context without the photo. Yeah, and even with the photo, though, like what, where it's going, like what the point is, what we've learned, what we discover, what we understand about ourselves or the world from reading the poem. I feel like that's missing. Even though there's really nice imagery and great turns of phrase and musicality into the way the words are on the page. Let's see. Jenny Middleton says, monochrome photos rewind the clock might make this abstract image more accessible without the photo. Let's see. Heather Hay says, I think the phrase single parent is a little ambiguous. Yeah. And Lisa Seidenberg says, I thought 2 women were standing in water. Winston Munn talks about swimming too. And I think that is like a lead in the way. And maybe because I've seen the photo and just could easily recall it, I didn't imagine that, even though we had skirts swimming. But I can see why that would conjure that feeling. Yeah. As Holly York says, this is impressive by a beginning poet. Totally agree. And it's something that I should probably point out more. And thanks for reminding me that was the case. Because there is a really beautiful sense of language and pace. There's a music to it. And it really right turns a phrase. It's just a matter of, there's a reason why you're compelled to write something or write about something. And really the poem is the search for its own meaning. It's like, my attention was drawn to this memory or this image that I saw, this photograph I'm looking at made me feel a certain way. Why? And a poem is the struggle and the wrestle to try to figure out the why, the why the poem wanted to be. And so often you see poems, especially early on, that don't find a direction, don't find a point. And that's what so often in a workshop you'll say, like, this poem needs to dig deeper. You need to go farther with what you're writing about. And I think that's what it is. Like, we don't get enough of the story to learn anything from the journey, even though the writing is very nice. So, Yeah, Deb T says the door opens has me thinking about the door to fall in the beginning. I agree that it has some lovely, intriguing lines, but I'm lacking knowing what it's really about. And it's a good summary of that. So it's a sense of context. It's not just that if we had the image. So ekphrastic poetry, I think it's a good way to understand poems too. Ekphrastic, the word itself, means it's from a Greek root, and it means like a description. And originally it was like you couldn't go see the Mona Lisa or whatever painting or the Sistine Chapel unless you were really lucky, but having a description of it that you could, it was before the age of photographs, and having a really nice description, that was what that meant. It was writing that describes something. But eventually we do have photographs. We do have all sorts of visuals all the time. And what poetry becomes in a world where you don't need to simply record things is to go beyond recording and record the sort of emotional energy that you can't take a photo of. And so there's something that is compelling about this photo, and that's what needs to get gotten across in the poem, not just the image itself. And right now we have really beautiful descriptions of the image itself, but like what does it do to you when you look at the photo? So that's the next sort of step. But it is really, really pretty writing. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, let's take a look at the other poem. And again, this is Afalabi David, and this one is Home Intruder. Snail treading on dull concrete tracks, I merely wave at you. Why squeeze yourself into your shell? Do you have a friend there? I want to be invited to this tea party at the mansion you wear. I plucked off your hose, folded myself into a ball and rolled into your backpack, fiddled with a zipper. Plunged through the door, there's no one there. But when you knocked, asking for yourself, I answered that the place was full. Wading through the tables, I rushed from seat to seat as the mucus sizzled under the sun outside, hammering my voice into different tributaries. A river of conversation flows with no fish. Listening to your friends, when you stop knocking, they will be at your burial. Well, again, I feel very similar to the last poem. There's some turns of phrases and images that I just love. And my favorite part in this poem is that I want to be invited to this tea party at the mansion you wear. I mean, what a great way to describe that with some kind of shelled insect is how I see it. Yeah. Yeah, well, I was reading it. Home Intruder. Or snail, sorry, it wasn't an insect. Snail treading on dull concrete tracks, I merely waved at you. Why squeeze yourself into your shell? Do you have a friend there? I want to be invited to this tea party at the mansion you wear. And there's a nice, you can hear, the ear, for music with the there and where internal rhyme, sort of a good length apart. So I plucked off your house, folded myself into a ball and rolled into your backpack, fiddled with the zipper, plunged through the door. There's no one there. So I'm really on the poem. I'm really enjoying the poem and feeling like it might go somewhere. And, at this point, like up to here, I'm like, okay, the snail's there. We have these great descriptions of the snail. I dive into it, and then it gets a little surreal, and I'm there on you with this journey. There's no one there, but when you knock asking for yourself, I answered that the place was full. And if the poem ended there, it might be sort of intriguing enough in its surrealness where I think you could maybe just leave it sit there. And we're sort of wondering about what it all means. And what I think I heard someone use the phrase extended metaphor. But if there's this surreal little story that we don't get a resolution for, and then we have the title Home Intruder, there's this really fun way we can think about how those connect and what it might be about and really mean on on a metaphorical level, a figurative level. And I think that would maybe to work if we just ended it there and let that sit. But then when you get wading through the tables, I rushed from seat to seat as the mucus sizzled under the sun outside, hammering my voice into different tributaries. So for this one, I'm not sure what that means, hammering my voice into different tributaries. A river of conversation flows with no fish. So I'm really getting sort of lost toward the end. Listen to your friends, and you have the you, so I'm not sure who you're talking to. Is it to the speaker, the reader of the poem? The snail, I'm a little confused. When you stop knocking, they will be at your burial. So to me, my real instinct is just to drop drop here, and just let the poem sit in its strangeness. We can find examples of really great poems that do that. I mean, one of my favorite poets is James Tate, and his poems are longer, but he's got that way that it just sort of the absurdity just hangs there. Or Russell Edson, Jose Hernandez Diaz is a contemporary sort of prose poet. You go to a lot of prose poets with the surrealness, because there's a way that not having the emphasis on the language lets the strangeness of what you're seeing in this world sort of be in the foreground. And so you get a lot of this kind of stuff with prose poets. But I do think it just sort of went on too far. And it's interesting, because we talked about the last poem not going far enough, like not finding its purpose. And there's a real strange balance between, finding your purpose and not realizing you did, and not finding it at all. And I think it's what you see with the two poems. Charles Simic does that too, says Desi. Another great poet to look at. Mary Lisa Diminishes says, is this a suicide poem? Maybe about someone with multiple personalities? I feel like I'm guessing too much. Yeah, so we have the title as Home Intruder. And one of the things, if we leave it surreal, we can really play with the title for how much you want to lead the reader in a certain direction. That's where you could say, lovesick or something. And then even though it seems like it's not about that, then we're forced to think about like how it could be like that. And then maybe it does add up to that, There's just a certain, and I don't know if Home Intruder is a little close to what the snail's actually doing to make it seem like an extended metaphor. But anyway. Okay, well, let's move on. Thanks for sharing those. Again, it was two poems by Afolabi David. And then there was somebody else who was here too. Let's see. CAD Original. Did CAD Original, or no, KAD, I'm sorry, KAD Original. Oh, there we go. Kriana Davis. Okay, great. So let's look at those next. Just 1 second. A lot of things to shuffle around as I find it. Hang on right there. Okay, so we have two poems here, separate submissions, but that's fine. Darkest Day is the first. And Kyriona is from Muskogee, Oklahoma. Well, thanks for being here. This is Darkest Day. No general question, so let's take a look at the poems. The first one is called Darkest Day. It's not in the poem itself. I'd advise just in the future when you're submitting anything for publication, include the title in the document. Because sometimes it's hard to see with the way, especially at Rattle, we do a lot of blind reading where we only see the document and don't see the meta stuff outside of it. And so having the title only in the metadata when you submit makes it so sometimes we can't see the title. And that happens, especially with the Ekphrastic Challenge. For some reason, that happens a lot. So anyway, put the title in the poem too. So write Darkest Day and then the poem to help us out. And that's just a general convention anyway. Okay, so Darkest Day, here we go. A virgin bride of a crown prince, the day was clean and kept as is. Lemongrass and violets stretch around my breasts and hips. Coppered bronze, my skin sun-kissed, with honeydews soaked in my lips. I lie with hair coiled into twists, and with cherry pits clenched in my fists. Squinting in surety, I'm blinded by solar beams as honeybees purple my knees and swim in my hot sugared tea. I rest beneath my pecan tree, indulging caramel sweet candies. I whistle low a child's song, ashes, ashes, we all fall. Peeping behind the pecan leaves, the solar beams keep smiling. I shuffle left to regard my face, to shield my skin from the sun's blaze. Like a child playing peekaboo, the sun shines through to spoil my mood. Utterly annoyed and desperate for shade, I rise to search for water to hydrate. I march away from my pecan tree, my knees plump up by the dint of bees. I feel a stinging, not from the bees, but from the heat of the solar beams. It's hot. I'm sweating. I pant heavily. I release from my hands the cherry seeds. I feel and hear my heartbeat thumping loud and quickly. Aren't I too young for a heat stroke? I grab my knees and begin to choke. I feel fire streaming from the sun. I panic and I begin to run. There we go. So the description is, notice how if we look back at Winston Munn's especially, his descriptions, how precise they were. There's a really nice, I like the use of rhyme, and there's some nice descriptions in here, but they're pretty general descriptions, and we don't really get a sense of connecting to the speaker. Like we don't, we start with a virgin bride of a crown prince, the day was slept clean and kept as it is. So we kind of assume we're in some medieval kind of time, but we don't really know, and then lemongrass and violets stretch around my breasts and hips. Coppered bronze, my skin sun-kissed with honeydew soaked in my lips. But it's nice slant rhymes. I do like the way it's not true rhymes, but, lips and twists and, sun-kissed and hips. Like I like the drift of there. It's very casual and it works well. I lie with hair coiled into twists and with cherry pits clenched in my fists. It's written a little bit toward the rhyme. So like the rhyme is generating the content in ways that it's sort of just extending the same place that the poem was going to instead of taking it to surprising places, if that makes sense. So it has a sort of the feeling of, even though it's like established well, we're sort of spinning our wheels a little bit and not getting as far as we sort of would or should in the poem, I think. Let me see. Yeah, Lisa Seidenberg says, where did the crown prince go? Rose Leonard says, the repetition of solar beams didn't work for me. Yeah, and then Chelsea McClellan points out, too, it sets up with monorhyme stanzas and then breaks from them, but not for an obvious reason. Yeah, it doesn't remain consistent either. Yeah. Yeah, for example, Deb T says, and that's what I'm talking about, like it feels like we went to cherry pits because of the rhyme and not because of we're working at something deeper than that, there's some story underneath, and we're really not getting the story underneath. I guess that's really what I'm trying to say. Yeah. Kevin West says, I'd love to see one odd detail. The cherry pits maybe send the poem off into a surprising direction where form, what can she do with them? Yeah. Okay. So anyway, let's keep going. Squinting and unsurety, I'm blinded by solar beams. We do repeat the solar beams a lot. It feels like most of the poem could be about two stanzas, and it feels like it just sort of repeats itself. And I'm waiting for the story to really take off and something to start happening. And it doesn't quite. So squinting and unsurety, I'm blinded by solar beams as honeybees purple my knees. And again, the honeybees purpling my knees, there's certain things that are just too close with the rhyme that make it feel like we're sort of writing toward that instead of surprising ourselves and letting new things come into play. I rest beneath my pecan tree, indulging caramel sweet candies. I whistle low a child's song, ashes, ashes, we all fall. Peeping behind the pecan leaves, the solar beams, again that comes up, keep smiling. I shuffle left to guard my face, to shield my skin from the sun's blaze. Like a child playing peekaboo, the sun shines through to spoil my mood. Utterly annoyed and desperate for shade, I rise to search for water to hydrate. And again, so there's this woman, who has, indulging beneath the pecan tree, but then the sun is getting in her eyes too much and she has to get up and is annoyed. And that's kind of the story that we have so far. I march away from my pecan tree, my knees plump up by the dint of bees. And here, that's another one where it just feels like we went to bees because of the knees in the tree. Yeah, Jenny Middleton says there's a very sensuous, dreamlike sense in the imagery. It's very psychedelic. Yeah, I mean, that's true. I feel a stinging, not from the bees, but from the heat of the solar beams. It's hot. I'm sweating. I pant heavily. I release from my hands the cherry seeds. I feel and hear my heartbeat thumping loud and quickly. Aren't you too young for a heat stroke? I grab my knees and begin to choke. And again, the stroke, it just feels like it's sort of forced into that rhyme. I feel fire streaming from the sun. I panic and begin to run. Oh, wait, there's a whole nother. Sorry, I thought this was the next poem. Maybe the story will unfold more, but it feels like it's been spinning a long time. Sorry for that. I thought this was the next poem. I don't know where to, but though it seems wherever I go, it follows me. My back is aching as it shines upon. I feel a burning, burning long. And again, the long upon is another. It just feels like we're sort of wrenching in the rhyme. I fall to my knees, which are now like plums. I feel a dryness on my skin and tongue. I have fallen weak to the flaring soul, the cosmic demon of fire and gold, unable to walk in the grass of torrid. I crawl into a nightmare of horrid. Over a hill I peek a ton of victims of the wicked sun. Those with skin fairer than me were slain and burnt salmon pink. Others, as over-ripened plantains, were seen spotted with brown on their skin. My pressure rises, my heart races, terror shone on their red faces. I hear a tune abrupt and loud, whistling in my ear, down. My heart drops for these poor creatures, melted with disfigured features. They must have felt undescribable pain. I think I see the green of their veins. Women, men, children, infants, scorched to death, all innocent. This is, though laced with beauty, the darkest day I've ever seen. Well, it does. It ends up going somewhere in a story, and it feels like it takes off a little bit where the story, you feel how it's like the beginning, the first half is sort of not going anywhere. We really linger under this pecan tree. We repeat a lot of stuff, frequently. And then in the second half, toward here, stuff starts happening. And so the poem picks up its pace. Yeah. And people are pointing out the hydrate. I need to hydrate up here. It feels off. It doesn't fit the form. Yeah. All right, but I would like to see more, sort of a Dante referent at the end, says Holly York. Winston Munn says, at some points, assonance of consonants could even replace slant rhyme, hydration instead of water to hydrate. Yeah, so, and then the poet themselves says, so the day at the beginning was seen to be beautiful until the sun makes it not. Yeah, and it, we really have to, again, it's sort of similar to the last we were talking about with ekphrastic poems and how, a story has to be more than showing a scene. There has to be sort of a point to it. There has to be a reason that it came into being, like something we learned in the process of writing the poem. And in this, even though it can be characterized, it can be, described in a succinct sort of story synopsis, which was, it was a beautiful day, but then the sun came out and it was hurting the main character, I guess, it's first person, the speaker's eyes, and then it becomes, this scorched earth situation where everybody's burning and, it's awful. Yeah. Then the author says, other critics said they want me to go more into the climax. What do you think? I think, Leslie Ann Skechterson says it got off track from the main story a lot, even though the images are nice. Yeah, I agree with Kevin West, I think. The rhyme is really guiding too much, and we're being so abstract, with the way we describe everything. There's really no sense. There's maybe a fantasy world type element around it. But there's really no sense of that world being like physical. Like we don't really feel like we're there. Even if we're writing in a time of like Game of Thrones that show, there's a tangible quality to that's not here. It feels more, like an abstract fairy tale. And I just, the main thing I would do is like to get the story down in a way that is more concrete. Yeah. That really helps us enter the poem. And I think maybe that would be helped by, like someone suggested, not using the rhyme and seeing what happens. Like tell it straight like a story and see what we get. And I think that would be my suggestion here. Okay. Yeah, let's take a look at the other one. It was Darkest Day. This next one is Gold. It's called I Must Be Gold. Here we go. Gold, you're so precious, yet men prefer the green. Gold, you're so expensive, yet men trade you in for paper. Gold, when you melted, you retain some vague value and purity. Yet paper, when she burns, she loses value, and men whimper. Well, that's an interesting. Let's take a look, because it's a short, concise poem, and this is the thing too. Like, if the poem can be paraphrased easily, and we've seen that a bunch today, where we could really easily tell the story of that last poem, where the sun came out and ends up being damaging, and that's sort of the quickest way you could say it. But you could paraphrase it really easily that way. And here we have this idea of what gold can do, and it's explained to us. It's sort of gold, you're so precious, yet men prefer the green. And I really like that. There's a nice rhythm and cadence to that opening. I like the first stanza, but it continues its idea. The thought that created the poem, like the idea you had, didn't go anywhere from that original idea. If that makes sense. And let me just pull up, because it is a poem about gold. One of the most famous poems around is Nothing Gold Can Stay by Robert Frost. And let's see the difference. And again, I think maybe with the rhymes that the poet enjoys, a good poem to look at too in that regard. Nothing gold can stay. Here's a short one. Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaf's a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf, so Eden sank to grief, so dawn goes down to day, nothing gold can stay. And if you look at this poem, it's saying more than you could paraphrase, you could paraphrase it as saying nothing gold can stay, but there's a lot more to it than that, because it moves through different types of gold, like things that are, the gold is like a metaphor for, like things that don't last. Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaf's a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf, and that's just a great line there. Then leaf subsides to leaf, so Eden sank to grief. And we go to Eden 2, and we talk about, and we think about the way these things, which are sort of disparate, leaves in Eden, are connected. So dawn goes down to day, nothing gold can stay. And so it becomes about so much more than nothing gold can stay. Like, does that make sense? There's a lot more to the poem than just the concept of the poem. And for here, we have the idea, but no branching out into sort of the strangeness or the depth of things. You know what I mean? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So take it somewhere surprising. Like, we have gold, you're so precious, yet men prefer the green. Gold, you're so expensive. And another thing too is that there's a nice rhythm to this poem. Gold, you're so precious, yet men prefer the green. It's that yet men prefer the green. It's really that the beats of that, the iambic were there. And then we lose that sense of it. Gold, you're so expensive. We sort of establishing a pattern in this first stanza that's not continued in the second, so it sort of breaks from that too. Gold, you're so expensive, yet men trade you in for paper. Gold, when you're melted, you retain some value and purity. So it's really sort of lost all the music of that first line. Another thing too is in establishing a pattern and then repeating with certain subtle variations the pattern. And this poem doesn't have that, so if you're going to set up a structure like this, which is little tight sentences, make sure it stays with that same kind of rhythm, if that makes sense. Gold, when you're melted, you retain some value and purity, yet paper, when she burns, loses value, and men whimper. Desi Cochrane says, I can imagine this being lyrics to a pop song. And Mark Goodrich says, put it in the third person. Yeah. Well, let's take a look at the third. Well, no, we already looked at two. There is a third, but let's not. Yeah, and this is the way to put it. Winston Munn says, this may be too black and white of comparison, gold versus currency, more rhetorical than poetic. Yeah, I mean, that's what I've been trying to find ways to say all day, really. It's an interesting sort of critique because it's pushing past like the rhetorical, by means what you can very easily articulate, and into what surprises you or what's unexpected. What's that one poem that went in a really surreal place worked really well because it pushed into its own sort of sense of imagination. And here it's like what's on the page. And it's the same thing with a poem that's about a painting or something, is it has to push deeper than just what's there, in the way that that ekphrastic poem was describing what you were seeing. This is describing what you were thinking. It's the same kind of thing, but nothing pushes past beyond that. There's nothing that you didn't know at the end that you already knew at the beginning. And so it's a matter of pushing yourself into surprise that's really missing, so, and sometimes focusing on the rhythm and things can help you go surprising places. But you want to make sure that they're places where there's like heat. I don't know. Anyway. Well, anyway, hope that was helpful. Let's see. So Rachel Grief says, in the metaphor, if gold is a woman, what is the paper? So in the author says, paper is also a woman. Yeah. So if this is a extended metaphor for, the gold represents something else, because the title is I Must Be Gold, it would be helpful to give us a hint at that by titling it in a way that where we know which one's gold and which one's paper and what you're talking about too. So maybe there's like an undercurrent of meaning that we just don't get to with this poem. All right. Well, anyway, that's going to wrap up the critique. Hope it was helpful. We always try to be. Thanks for being here. As always, it's a lot of fun to look at poems at this level of depth. And we appreciate it. So that was, once again, Kariana Davis from Oklahoma sharing those poems. You mark them as discussed. And there we go. And this one, too. There were two separate files. Okay, that's going to wrap up the critique of the week for this week. There we go. Now, next week's guest in the Rattlecast is going to be Maury Creech. So we saw some formal poetry here. Maury Creech is, of course, a very well-known formal poet. His most recent book is The Sentence, but he was winner of the 2025 Rattle Poetry Prize for his book, his poem, An Ordinary Childhood. That's from a manuscript that's not published yet. He's going to be mostly reading poems from that manuscript. So it's a lot of fun to look at those poems and see more broadly than that amazing poem, An Ordinary Childhood. What else is going into that manuscript? I've been curious for like 6 months. What is there besides for that? So I'm looking forward to talking to Maury Creech and sharing some of his poems on the Rattlecast Monday night. The prompt for this week was to write a poem that moves fast and include as many unique verbs as possible. So a fast poem with interesting verbs. That is your prompt for this week. The guest, Maury Creech, Monday, February 16th, the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you there. Hope you have a great weekend. In the meantime, and we'll talk to you later. Goodbye.